Oh, hey, Webster Tarpley's joining us there, everybody.
Hey, hello.
Hey, Webster, can you hear us?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, fantastic! It's great to have you back on. Boy,
Thank you.
Twice in a day. It's a real treat.
How's it going, Webster?
Not too bad.
We got Shepard and Bellis here, Kenneth Webb, and Joe Bannister.
Hi, Webster.
Just kind of talking about the independent media a bit and the importance of having that counterbalance to the mainstream media, Webster.
Well, let me say maybe a couple of things. I think that what we've seen over the past year, since the Bilderberger group of last year, is the complete failure and breakdown of what used to be called patriot media or libertarian media, the area that generally supported Ron Paul and has now switched to Rand Paul. And this was always deeply problematic, but you could say that as long as these people were fighting something like the 9/11 big lie, right, the official story on 9/11, they were having a positive social function. But now they've tied themselves to a faction of the Republican Party, that is to say, Ron Paul. And as that has degenerated, and as that has become more and more obviously a power play, right? Ron Paul supporting Romney, Ron Paul then, Rand Paul endorsing Romney openly, and now Rand Paul allied with Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz's wife, of course, is from Goldman Sachs. Everybody should know that to put him in perspective, right? And that Mike Lee, that entire clique. What you're left with is that entire thing is being sucked back into the extreme right wing of the Republican Party, and all the positive social role or political role that it could have played, all of that is gone. And what you see is that the people who were the great lights of patriot media, libertarian media, they're really competing with Breitbart. They're trying to be the new Breitbart. They're trying to get on Matt Drudge. They want Matt Drudge to like them. They want Drudge to prefer them to Breitbart. They're trying to get on Fox News every now and then. So this has become a real serious problem because all of those people are getting convoyed back into the Republican Party. That is why I think something like Unbound Media is important as a laboratory to find a way to maintain an attitude of very radical criticism towards both parties, both Democrats, Wall Street Democrats, and reactionary or fascist Republicans, because that is what you now seem to have. And it's an effort, obviously, to maintain an independent position. But I would urge people to do it. And there's a cultural aspect, right? Because the world of this patriot radio was some kind of I don't know what, country and western. And this is fine as far as it goes, but that can't be the only thing. There's got to be something urban. There's got to be something labor-oriented, right? There's got to be something which is not simply, I don't know what, deep in the heart of Texas, right? This is not the whole story. That will never do, right? There's an urban industrial Northeast or California or Midwest. All of that has gotten really, very little attention, and I think it would need more. Case in point is this stuff in Egypt, which maybe we can talk about if people want.
Yeah.
I think that this is a very good thing that we have General Sisi and the Egyptian army, because what was going to happen there, and you can see it now more clearly in retrospect, is that the Muslim Brotherhood with Morsi, but also with Al-Qaeda, right? Today, the news from today is that Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda, had his brother arrested in Egypt by the police and the army, right? So the brother of the world's top Al-Qaeda terrorist, that was the head of the top CIA, Arab Legion, or whatever you want to call it, he was arrested. So you could see that what they were trying to do was to bring the Syrian civil war to Egypt, or the Libyan civil war to Egypt. That model, that is what they absolutely wanted to do. They wanted to have a coup where Morsi would be the coup from inside the presidential palace. They could start this Islamic Emirate of the Sinai Peninsula. That would allow the U.S. and NATO to come in and seize the Suez Canal, and the country would begin to break up. Because remember what their model is. They want to have the caliphate. So what's the caliphate? The caliphate is one supreme boss who sits above it, and then you have these emirs, right? So everybody can be their own emir, right? Egypt could fall into 20 or 50 emirates, right? And the Sinai could be one of them, right? There are emirates functioning in northern Syria right now, several, more than one. So you get the idea. This is what was planned. And it looks to me like General Sisi was able to beat them to the punch. In other words, he preempted them. He saw what was coming. He realized that most generals would be assassinated under that scenario, right? If Morsi had remained in power, there was going to be a civil war. Lots of generals would have just been taken out and shot. And I wanted to remind people. I have a lot of people writing me that the U.S. wanted the coup. The U.S. owns the Egyptian army. 1.5 billion is not enough to buy the Egyptian army. Saudi Arabia is already paying 10 to 12 million in protection money, and just because they're so scared, they paid that money. So Egypt doesn't need that money. But here we have the Washington Post of Thursday. The U.S. criticism of Egypt reflects fears of military rule, I would say fears of Nasserism, because what we have now is a new Nasserism, and that, of course, in the Middle East, historically, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, Nasserism was the thing that the imperialists hated and feared most. And they always backed the Muslim Brotherhood against the Nasserists, right? They just always did, from the 1920s to the 50s to today. That has never changed. So I would say rather than say there's the danger of a civil war, I would say that the Egyptian army has preempted a civil war. In other words, they struck first before the Civil War guys were ready to go into action. And what you see now is a broken-backed version of what the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to do, and they're losing, right? And I don't think this goes on for too much longer, because they're just they're getting mopped up, right? They're getting quelled. So that's the end of that.
How do you think the economy is going to be looking for the next year here in America? And will this Egypt scenario play into that?
Well, I was hoping you were going to ask me about the Egypt economy, because that's what I have to work on right now.
Okay.
What do you do if you're General Sisi now, right? Look, legitimacy, right? There is a problem with legitimacy, right? Legitimacy can come from elections, and you can call that, formal legitimacy. On the other hand, in Egypt, nobody really had that kind of legitimacy, because this guy Morsi made it up as he went along, right? Last December, after he sold out to the International Monetary Fund, he put a thing in the Constitution. He, as president, alone, right, acting on his own, he put a thing in the Constitution saying everything the president does is above the Constitution and not subject to judicial review, right? So that's a little bit, that's really not very legitimate, right? That's certainly not the democratic method. But what the legitimacy that Egypt needs is substantive legitimacy, right? It's what every government needs. If you want to be legitimate, you got to deliver the goods. Deliver the goods means a government is responsible for rising standards of living, full employment, health care so people live longer lives, improved standards of education, the full array of material and cultural progress that anybody in the world would need. And I would urge General Sisi to think about that, right? He ought to think about a program for 5 million jobs. The official unemployment in Egypt is about 3.5 million, but that's a low ball. That's way too small for a country that's high. It just means that most people are not in the labor force. So minimum 5 million new jobs in, say, 6 months, 4 million new homes, right? Dwelling units, apartments. You got to remember the old idea of the Cape to Cairo railway down the Nile and then to South Africa, right? You got to start it from Cairo, make it the Cairo to Cape railway. You do the same thing across the northern part of the country, right, from Benghazi, Libya to Palestine, and Jerusalem, Amman, Damascus, and the rest of these places. The same, obviously superhighways along the same lines. And all you have to do with that is two things. You have to seize control of the central bank and force them to put out large amounts of 0% 100-year credit so you can build these things. You can use your internal resources for most of it. For what you can't manufacture yourself, right, for the modern capital goods that you would need to import, I would say the BRICS bank, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? They're the BRICS. They've been talking about a bank that would be an alternative to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. That is exactly what we need, but now we need it. And it should be, I would urge them to fund it. They were going to put $250 billion into that bank. That's what they should do. They say they're putting in $50 billion. Fine. If they have $50 billion, they should probably assign about half of that to Egypt. In other words, launch the BRICS Development Bank on the world stage by coming in and allowing Egypt to import all of these high-quality capital goods that they would need, right? And that would give you the legitimacy that really counts, right? The legitimacy of succeeding in raising the standard of living. That is what Morsi promised, by the way. Morsi said that the purpose of his government was going to be economic justice, to raise the standard of living of the poorest workers and peasants. And then he turned around and made a deal with the International Monetary Fund, raised the sales tax, and even he talked about a value-added tax, and he was trying to chip away at these subsidies, right? In these countries like Egypt, there's a floor under everybody, which means no matter how broke you are, you can buy a couple of really nice big loaves of bread, or you can get cooking oil, or you can get the fuel to heat your house, or even gasoline. He abolished the support on gasoline. He doubled the price of gasoline last autumn. Right now, any government in the world, imagine here, you double the price of gasoline. Right, you're going to get riots. You're going to get all kinds of problems. So it just shows how crazy Morsi was to give in to the IMF, and everybody knew that was the issue, and that would happen. So that's what I would hope for.
That's tremendously interesting, Webster. And I was just thinking, when I was a kid, I mean, I don't know, 20-something years ago, gas used to be about $1 a gallon, less than $1 a gallon, and now we're looking at $3, $4, $5 gas places. Do you attribute all that to inflation in the U.S., or do you think there is a plan behind that to possibly, break the backs of the American people? What's your take on that?
Well, part of it is the decline of the dollar goes hand in hand with the deindustrialization of the United States. In other words, if you want to have a strong dollar, stronger than it is now, you cannot systematically destroy every industrial plant that was making things, and a lot of it was there for export. Now, the U.S. the U.S. de-emphasized exports after the Marshall Plan, really around 1950. They began saying, let's not do all the work of traipsing into Latin America or Africa or other places and try to sell things. Let's just stay home, and let's have, in Detroit, they called it built-in obsolescence, right? They say, let's make clunkers that will fall apart after 3 years, and then we can always sell more, right? And it was clear. Then Volkswagen came in, followed by the Japanese, and you can't do that, right? So you got to make quality products, and if you want to know why Detroit is in bad shape, it's because of those stupid decisions by the stupid management of General Motors and these other companies, right?
Well, it's like go drive a Ford Escort, and then go drive a BMW, and
yeah, right.
You really notice the quality difference, and I don't think they ever figured it out. Really, it's like is it a race to the bottom of the barrel, or some of these. It's almost like the whole China thing. Like, you can get anything from China, but it's pretty much junk. Well, America's kind of in between. And you got like some good quality stuff coming out of Germany, and it makes you wonder why a lot of times American engineering just isn't superb. What's your take on that, Webster?
Well, it has to be revived, right? It has to make a comeback. You have to have a systematic policy of reindustrialization, and that's what I've been arguing for a long time. Right now, obviously, you have biotech, you have a certain amount of Silicon Valley. Other than that, you got agricultural products, right? That's what the U.S. makes. But just back to energy. Why is energy expensive? A lot of it has to do with the devaluations of the dollar over many years, right? There were formal devaluations in the early 1970s, right? They were, Nixon, right, is the worst of all of these people, right? Under the Bretton Woods system, there were fixed parities, and there was gold settlement, not a gold standard, that you don't want, but gold settlement, meaning that among central banks, among countries, there would be, from time to time, there would be, settling of accounts in gold as needed, right? And the problem was the U.S. was always running these deficits. The way to get out of the deficit is to have an export campaign, but they never really wanted to do it. The other thing, though, that I would stress lately is derivatives, right? It is this question of speculation, because if you want to know what drives up the price of gasoline right now, it's this unbelievable speculation with derivatives, right? When you've got virtual barrels, you've got the real barrels are relatively few. The virtual barrels are unlimited. And you can still, on the ICE exchange in London, you can buy long and never take delivery. And in other markets, you can sell short something that you don't have. In other words, you could naked shorting of other commodities, other stocks or things like that they want to drive down. This is in one of my proposals here that it would be important, first of all, to ban certain forms of derivatives. They should just be outlawed. The collateralized debt obligation in any form should be banned, outlawed. Remember that derivatives were banned in the United States from 1936 to 1982 under the Commodity Exchange Act of the New Deal. Derivatives were outlawed. Yeah. Well, Stupid Reagan brought them back in 1982, but they were so smelly that it took 20 years to rehabilitate them, and the final rehabilitation was thanks to Clinton, Rubin, and Summers. Right?
Well, look at what they got now, Webster. They even got a weather derivative market. I mean, you can basically go bet on the weather. You can now then geoengineer something and make money on it. I mean, how cool is that?
But this is exactly parasitism. In other words, this is the London whale, right? If you want the London whale of the J.P. Morgan Chase. So these two little people were just indicted this past week. Right? Fabulous Fab Touré was indicted for his role in the London whale. But what you would need to do is again, the collateralized debt obligation was what destroyed Lehman Brothers. It's what destroyed Merrill Lynch. It's what really destroyed every bank on Wall Street in terms of those banks. Right? They were all holding collateralized debt obligations. Then there's the credit default swap. Credit default swap is different. Right? This is betting on whether something will go bankrupt or not. And this is another bucket shop. In other words, it allows you to bet on something and call it insurance without having an insurable interest. In other words, I can insure my house because I need a house, so I have an interest, right? I care one way or the other. But with a credit default swap, you can bet on some event, that it's 1,000,000 miles away from you, and that you have no stake in whatsoever, like whether a certain country will go bankrupt or not. That's been the main use of credit default swap. So if they're gambling, they're illegal, and if they're a form of insurance, they're also illegal because the people putting them out don't have the requirements to be an insurance company and haven't registered as insurance companies. So those two clearly, but now specific, and that's what destroyed AIG, right? That is what cost the American taxpayer, $150 billion. The wonders of credit default swaps. But now on energy, there are two forms of derivatives that are used to bid up the price of oil and gas, and these are index swaps. It's a different kind of swap. The index swap, in particular on the London ICE exchange, should be banned, and that ban would be the United States will not allow the importation of anything that was the object of an index swap, and will not allow index swaps to be enforced. In other words, I can go and gamble in London on index swaps, and if I lose all the money, they come and collect. No, you can't collect in the United States. Go home. So that will dry that up. And then we have, this is complicated, but an exchange-traded fund, right? An exchange-traded fund used to be called closed-end mutual fund, but
yeah,
an exchange-traded fund, but specifically the kind that are based on synthetic bets of commodity futures.
Oh, that sounds real reputable. But that almost sounds palatable the way you described it.
Huh?
I said that almost sounds palatable the way you described it.
No. The exchange, this is absolute poison. This is like polonium. It's an exchange-traded fund based on synthetic bets involving commodity futures. So those would be banned. If you look at the evolution of the price, you'll see that in the summer of 2008, the price of a barrel of oil reached about $150 a barrel, remember? And then the bottom fell out in New York.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody was on the verge of bankruptcy. And as the stock market fell, well, all that meant was that everybody was selling assets, right? Every zombie bank, every hedge fund was massively selling assets to get cash, because they thought the assets would go down, but also they needed cash, to stay alive, right, to pay their commitments, right, to make, to balance the books at the end of the day.
Right.
And it went down to about $30 a barrel. So from 150 to 30. And that just shows you that the amount of speculation was, 120, maybe 100 to 120. I don't know all of that, right? Maybe it overcorrected, but certainly there was $100 of speculation, and that would mean you've got to figure it out, right? Of every dollar you were paying at the pump, if you were paying $5 or $6 a gallon at the pump, you were paying $1 to Goldman Sachs, $1 to Morgan Stanley, $1 to J.P. Morgan Chase on what you were paying. They were skinning you alive. They were peeling you like a lemon. And then once it reached bottom, the speculators looked around and they looked at Bush and then they looked at Obama and they said, will Obama do anything to shut us down? And then they looked at his appointees and they said, no, we can get back to work. And then after that, it started climbing up again to where it is now, about 100, right?
Right, yep.
So that's it. If you don't like those prices, smash the speculators. And that's my bottom line is always fight bankers. Fight bankers, fight bankers. Don't waste your time fighting
Webster.
Anybody else. Fight bankers.
So Webster, why do we support the banks? I mean, why do I even take my paycheck? People. Why
Webster, you didn't know that, did you?
Why do we take our paychecks to the bank and even put them in the bank and then write checks against that? Why do we even do that? Why, and then if we go cash our check at the bank, they still want to charge us $5. Isn't there a way out of this? I mean, haven't we figured this out? What should we do?
Well, there's a traditional model of commercial banking which can work very, very well. It requires a completely different mentality. Let me say, one of the best things going on in New York City right now is the campaign of Randy Credico in the Democratic primary, and then after that, we hope after Tuesday, he'll also be on the ballot for the Tax Wall Street Party. His main demand is a 0.5% or 1% Wall Street sales tax. Here's the problem for a banker right now. You look at what kind of money can you make doing derivative speculation? What kind of money can you make building, plant and equipment and hiring people and manufacturing something, right? The rate of profit on the rip-off speculation is greater. The playing field is tilted in favor of speculation. One of the things is, if you go and manufacture something and you want to sell it, the person who buys it has to pay a sales tax, right? And you're going to be taxed all the way through what you're doing. Whereas if you get a screen and start speculating, you can do 1 million trades a second, and there's no sales tax. You don't pay anything. So that means the whole playing field is tilted, right? This fundamentally corrupts and skews the banking system, right? You got to tilt that back.
Yeah.
That's what Wall Street sales tax comes in.
Well,
Then you have
it all.
to say to bankers, look, you want to be a banker, your job is to be a commercial banker to provide investment, productive investment in plant and equipment and the hiring of new productive labor to make goods, commodities, tangible physical production. There's nothing wrong with fractional reserve banking. And matter of fact, that's good because you want to generate credit, right? You want to have credit for industrial and agricultural purposes coming from a national bank into a commercial bank. The commercial bank should not, hoard that money or do whatever. The model of banking we have right now is actually the Austrian school model of banking. It's what von Mises and von Hayek write about. They want banks that do not do fractional reserve lending. They just speculate for their own account, and then they rip you off with fees. Right? That's the model of banking we have right now. So you've got to, I'm afraid the only way to do it is the money-centered banks. Right? It probably means the first 7 or 8 banks have to go through. For most of them, Chapter 11. I'm afraid for some of them, Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So whatever process, you got to wipe out the derivatives.
Webster, whatever happened to simplicity? I mean, all of this just sounds too crazy. I mean, just what you just ran through, the average person's got to be like, wow, I got to know all this stuff just to, figure this and that out. What about, taxes, the tax system, for instance? I mean, there's all these books, there's, thousands, if not millions of tax codes, who knows? What, why not just do something simple like flat across the board? So, whoa, I know what, okay, Webster, here we go. I'm a millionaire, and, today I go out and buy a whole house full of furniture. I buy one Ferrari, and I eat dinner out, and hey, so I get taxed a certain percent. Well, okay, I'm a poor person. I'm in poverty. I buy one McDonald's hamburger today and one T-shirt. Okay, I get taxed the same percent. Why can't the system just be simple like that? Something that's simple that people could figure out.
Look, the first thing I would say is I would warn the Republican Demagogic Party tries to get people based on the fact that a lot of people are sincerely bewildered and frightened by the complexity of the modern world. In other words, it's essentially, complexity is not the issue. I think this is a very misleading way to approach the problem. If you want to take taxation, the reality of taxation is this. There are 3 kinds. There's regressive, there's proportional, and there's progressive. What you call, regressive is, that would be everybody pays the same amount. Does that sound fair? Everybody pays $500. Yeah, wait a minute. There's a millionaire who won't even notice it. He spends that much every day for lunch or for
right.
coffee.
So why not make it a percentage?
Yeah, because that's still regressive. That's still regressive. That's the secret is that proportional is regressive in effect. Because what it does is, what are you cutting into? If you're charging, say, 10%, you say, oh, that's equal for everybody. That's wonderful. Well, wait a minute. You're cutting a tiny bit of the luxuries of the rich.
Right.
You're cutting a lot more.
Okay.
Wait a minute. You're cutting the amenities of the middle class. The amenities of the middle class. Like, can we have a bottle of wine tonight? Can we go to the movies? Right. And above all, you're gouging the necessities of the poor. Because when you get down to the poor, the whole budget goes for necessities and nothing but. There are no amenities.
The rich, Webster, say, well, it's an incentive. It's why we need tax breaks for the richest, because it's an incentive if you do well, or it's an incentive to do well. Why not tax them more then? And tax people that don't have money a little less, free things up.
No, I don't propose increasing taxes on individuals at all.
Right.
I propose to tax Wall
Tax
Street.
the banks, yeah.
Tax bankers. I've said it a million times. Fight bankers, and I mean bankers in their institutional capacity. Right, the banker as individual. We'll see. Right, we'll get them later. I suspect.
Yeah. That's round two.
That's round two. But right now, this is amazing, right? Remember the nobility before the French Revolution, pre-1789? And they said, oh, we're the nobility and we pay no taxes.
Right.
And the clergy, who were also nobles, the top clergy, say, we're the clergy and we pay no taxes. So that meant the poor bourgeoisie, right, the people in the towns and the peasantry had to pay for everything. So this is what we have now. We have a Wall Street finance elite that says, we pay nothing. We pay no sales tax. And they pay no, wait a minute, they pay no federal corporate income tax. And indeed, General Electric being a hedge fund, actually gets money back from the federal government.
Yeah.
The federal government owes them. They pay nothing. The federal government has to pay them.
Wouldn't it be best interest of some of these bankers? You know, you hear the analogy like every American in their lifespan might be worth like $6 million or something of that nature. Wouldn't it be in their best interest that they free up the lower class, the middle class? They free them up a little bit. They give them a little bit of revenue to work with so that the economy can actually flourish. Would this be in the best interest, or what's the deal with that? I mean, why are they suppressing the masses?
Well, the principal problem is short-sighted greed. It's greed, and it's very short-sighted greed. Now, here's what I would say. You want to compete in the 21st century. Oh, yeah. Well, then you're going to compete with Europe, which manages now to have a better upward mobility for poor people. And if you're poor, you have a better chance of getting out of poverty in Northern Europe than you do in the United States. The United States social mobility is now the worst of any advanced country except the British. The British are...
Is it designed like that? Is it designed like that? Is it designed?
No, this is, it's the result of all, all kinds of policy mistakes. It's basically something that has emerged since the Kennedy assassination.
So it's like a failure policy.
It's here's what it is. It's the failure of a ruling class. If you have a ruling class of bankers, once again, you're going to get these bad results. In other words, if you want to compete with China and Japan, where people work hard and study hard, and Europe and these other places, you have got to develop your labor force. Alexander Hamilton pointed out the main wealth, qualified labor force. That's your wealth. Forget about natural resources. No, your wealth is labor. It's the quality of your labor power. Now, that means you would have to say, look at the U.S. labor force and uplift them. In other words, make investments in your human capital. Otherwise, the Chinese will eat you for lunch. And remember, all of these things I hear from the libertarians, they say, oh, it's too expensive to have health care. You've got to have health care. You've got to have health care so that if you're paying to put a guy to get a Ph.D. and a postdoctoral in biomedical sciences or physics, we can't have him get the degree at 35 and then he dies 20 years later. We can't
Webster,
do that. He's got to live a long, productive life. Get the picture?
The healthcare, it's almost like they're just charging too much straight out from the get-go. I mean, you go to the hospital or to the doctor, and it's like you just sit there, first of all, for like 2 hours, and it's like they don't even notice you. It's like if you were dying, you'd already be dead. And then, you're in this waiting room. They kind of make you feel like, they're your master. You're just kind of sitting there. You got to fill out this paperwork. You're susceptible to them. They kind of treat you strange. Then they do a couple things you basically could have diagnosed yourself, and then they're taking some x-rays, and the next thing you know, they're charging you $5,000 for, a 2-hour deal that they basically made you just sit there the whole time.
In that case,
what do you make of this?
You better sign up for Obamacare so you get some of that paid for. Here's the thing. The only kind of society, historically, that can afford the kind of health care that we want, right? If you're in the United States today, you have an idea of what healthcare should be and the availability, which should be universal, right? The only kind of society that's historically been able to afford this is an advanced industrial society. In other words, a society that produces a social surplus which is big enough to invest in those hospitals, nurses, doctors, laboratories, research facilities, and all the rest of it. What you have in the United States today is no longer an advanced industrial society.
Right.
This is a junk heap. It's a service economy. It's a post-industrial society. And, of course, you can't afford it. In other words, the reason it's so expensive is that the absolute profit of the society is no longer enough to finance that whole area of services, right? Because the trick with medical care is it is essential for the quality of your labor force, but it is not in itself production. Production for it. In other words, if you build an MRI, that's production. That's a productive act.
Right.
But when you get the MRI working, that is saving lives and everything. But the assumption has to be that the people that get saved by the MRI are going to go back to work, and that's where you realize the net profit for the society. So again, bankers and their deindustrialization. I must say also, radical environmentalists have played a tremendous role in this destruction. But it's mainly people like Volcker, right? The U.S. export economy was wiped out between Carter and Reagan under the auspices of Paul Adolph Volcker, right? When the prime rate went to 22%, in that 80, 81, 82, that basically destroyed export industries. So since then, you've been in a post-industrial junk heap, and it's not surprising that the prices of healthcare are so exorbitant, because it's no longer an advanced industrial society. You want to be able to afford all that stuff, you can give that to everybody, and you have to, but you better reindustrialize them.
I think that let me say this, Webster. I think that what you said certainly makes a lot of sense. The issue is that I believe that most libertarians think that way of life is attainable. And while I would love for every individual to be responsible for themselves, the fact of the matter is that, and I would love to have a free market. I would love for there to be absolutely no need for any regulation. Problem is, we're human. And there will be humans that are going to try and take advantage. There are going to be humans that try to loot and plunder you. And there are going to be humans that are going to get stepped on and walked on. And that's why it's so important to have that regulation. Webster, would you say that one critical juncture here, at the very least, would be perhaps a re-implementation of Glass-Steagall?
Yeah, Glass-Steagall is fine. It's all well and good. But Glass-Steagall is what you would have needed, in 2005, right? You could have separated the speculative business from the commercial banking part. The Glass-Steagall I'm 100% for Glass-Steagall, but there are two provisos with this. One is that's to protect you from the next bubble. I guess the next bubble is building up, right? So Glass-Steagall is always a good thing. But here's the other thing, is that if you think that you're going to agitate with Glass-Steagall, you're crazy. Because you're going to go to somebody who's facing foreclosure, and he's got a sick wife, and he can't get health care, and he's got to pay the tuition for his kid, and you're going to say, let's have Glass-Steagall. That's crazy, because this is a process reform. In other words, it makes a lot of sense, but it does not address the immediate life and death issues of people today. It's a process reform, and I'm all for it. But when it comes to agitation, the form of agitation is no to austerity, whatever it is. In other words, no killer cuts, no genocidal austerity, no cuts in Medicare, in Social Security, in Head Start, no sequester, none of that stuff. All right, then, who should pay? Wall Street pays with the Wall Street sales tax, right? That's the secret of the budgets, right? The problem of budgets at all levels in the United States is that Wall Street pays nothing. No sales tax and no federal income tax. So we want to make them pay.
Could you imagine this, Webster? could you imagine a shift in foreign policy away from being imperialist and at the same time implementing a tax on the bankers? Could you imagine how many and how much resources there would be available to the American people to actually take care of things at home? Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable the resources that are wasted and squandered, really, if you think about it.
Yeah, but there were two things. One is the Wall Street sales tax. In other words, some derivatives have to be banned, but you can't ban all of them. It's too complex, right? So you do something simple. You slap a 1% tax on all derivatives, stocks, bonds, and derivatives transactions. Let the feds keep half of that. Let the states get the other half, because we're talking about maintaining the social safety net, maintaining education, maintaining essential services, the fabric of civilization, in other words. Head Start, school lunches, all the things, Meals on Wheels, whatever it is, right? Veterans benefits. That's all got to be paid for by Wall Street with a Wall Street sales tax. That's on budget. But then you got the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, again, has to be seized. You call up Bernanke, a real president or a powerful movement could call up Bernanke and say, look, Ben, we want $5 trillion made available tomorrow through a credit stimulus window, and you're going to put out a tender offer. Any governor who's got a shovel-ready big infrastructure project, right? We're going to rebuild the interstate highway system. We're going to rebuild the the electricity grids. We're going to rebuild the canal systems, ports, water systems, sewage systems, right? All of that stuff in the Northeast is
just crumbling.
150 years
crumbling.
Old, right?
Old infrastructure
happening, right?
Right.
But just one example, right? I was on Capitol Hill the other day. Capitol Hill newspaper says that because the Panama Canal is being widened, we're going to have to address the problem of the railroad tunnel that goes underneath the dome of the Capitol, right? You know this. There's a railroad tunnel underneath the House, the Senate, and the Capitol. But the problem is it's not big enough for the new containers that are going to come off the Panamax under the new expanded Panama. Anyway, so this is the Wall Street sales tax. But then the Fed has to be they've got to put out $5 trillion, and they got to offer that at 0% for 100 years, and then with that you essentially restart your economy. In other words, the Obama stimulus had some positive effects, but ultimately it failed. It did not create a recovery because it was just to prop up the state budgets for a couple of years, and then it's over with. It has positive effects as long as it lasts, but it doesn't address the issue of capital goods production. And that's where the depression exists, right? The depression is you're not producing locomotives, generators, machine tools, heavy-duty equipment for local and also for export. So that's what you have to do. And if you say we're going to build the maglev from Boston to New York to Chicago and San Francisco, and another one from Chicago to New Orleans, and all the rest of this stuff, right? That's where you get into the heavy-duty capital goods production, and there you get a sustainable recovery. Plus the national bank, right? The Federal Reserve becoming a bureau of the Treasury can simply continue to finance that, forever, right? Because that's what they should do. They should finance industrial development, not speculation, not financial services, right? You got to prove, before you get the loan, you got to prove that it's one of the approved categories of lending, and that means it's got to be tangible physical production. If you're a farmer, a miner, if you're making something, right, then you can get it.
I mean, these are all fantastic ideas, Webster. How do you go about getting them implemented? How do we go and nationalize the Federal Reserve?
Well, right now, the focus, obviously, the nationalization of the Federal Reserve. We've done two campaigns, and I'm talking the United Front Against Austerity. Elizabeth Warren has come along with a proposal, which is the first thing coming out of the Congress that I can remember, I mean, in my lifetime, that I know of anyway, where she's talking about a partial nationalization of the Federal Reserve. And it was this. It's the Bank on Students Act that she brought out in May, and it said that from now on, for a year, should be longer, but at least for a year, the interest rate on the federal Stafford loan, student loan, right, for college kids, goes down to 0.75%. So it was, when she made the proposal, it was 3.4%. It's now up to 6.8%. There are proposals to change it. We don't need to get into those. But she said, no, don't mess around with that. Get down to 0.75. Where does the money come from? She said, money will be provided by the Federal Reserve through the discount window. In other words, if I'm a zombie banker in real big trouble, I can go to the discount window and get money at 0.75%. I should be able to do that as a student, 0.75%. And the bill said the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve shall make available this money. In other words, they're ordered, they're coerced, because it's a creature of the Congress. But it acts as if it's completely separate. But what we need to do is get our hands on that credit-creating power so that we can use that for job creation, or in this case, to vastly improve our student loan situation, right? This is now $1 trillion. Imagine the savings if you cut it down from 6 or 7% to less than 1%.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. That's a big burden. It's not ideal. This is not my idea of a complete solution, but this is a big step in the right direction. And above all, it has this idea: you force the Fed to do what is socially necessary, not what the banks want. You're not there to serve banks.
Right.
You're there to serve the public interest, Bernanke or whoever it is.
Well, then how else do you, let me ask you this, how do you implement a tax on those that lobby very heavily to gain favor in Washington? And I'm talking about the banksters.
All right, well, there are two things, right? One is, if you look at Occupy Wall Street last year.
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street was run by agents, right? It was run by anarchists who were, in, I think, quite a few cases, pretty conscious NATO agents, right? Intelligence agents, records.
Right.
They were there to wreck the thing. And they came up with this stuff about, oh, we're Occupy Wall Street, and we have no demands. We don't want to have any demands. Demands are bad. We might then we'd be co-opted. Our program is to be in the park and to defecate in the park and get everybody to join us in the park. It was actually crazy. It was pure anarchism, right? That the entire society would come and join them, and then that would be some kind of utopia. It's crazy, right? No working family could even dream of such things, right? It's absolutely nuts. But suppose you had real leadership in Occupy. You could have held the Congress at gunpoint. You could have said to them, we want 0% interest on student loans, and we want a 1% Wall Street sales tax to pay for it, or some other system, right? That could have all been done in the autumn of 2011. It was, you could have had it if they had one or two demands, preferably one demand.
Yeah.
They could have forced the Congress to pass it. Okay, that would have been one way to do it. The other way to do it, of course, is what we're doing now. We've got people out on the sidewalks of New York gathering the signatures, doing the slog, and it's the Tax Wall Street Party. Randy Credico, right? A colorful New York figure, a typical figure of the New York left. Not all perfect, right? And I don't agree with him on everything, and nor does he with me. But on this core, that if you're going to do anything in New York, you've got to tax Wall Street. You want to have pre-K education, tax Wall Street. You want to make the city college free, tuition free, the way it was, right? The way it was in the 60s and 70s. You got to have the Wall Street sales tax. If you want to rebuild the infrastructure, you got to have the Wall Street sales tax. So what I'm hoping for is that this Credico campaign, right, and that's for the it's for the Democrat primary on September 10th. But then, if we get the signatures, which we think we're getting, we'll know that next Tuesday, Wednesday, or sometime next week. Then it will go all the way to November 5th. Right?
Yeah.
Then he'll be on the ballot. The Democratic Party with de Blasio or some Soros puppet, and then it'll be Tax Wall Street Party, Randy Credico. I think that will put the Tax Wall Street Party on the map. In other words, Tax Wall Street, people generally don't know that Wall Street isn't taxed. And the average person, when they realize that Wall Street is not taxed, they get so angry, they say, well, those bums should pay what I pay, right? If I pay 8% sales tax, that's what they should pay. And indeed, there's a case to be made for that. And I don't want to be seen as, trying to cool that ardor. I'm proposing 1%, right? There are people in the Democratic Party who are proposing, 1/100th or 1/1000th of 1%. I think that's pathetic. By the way, there is already there's a tiny tax. There's a tax of about, 12 1,000ths or something, which finances the Securities and Exchange Commission. But that's only on stocks. If that were on derivatives, that would get you somewhere.
Holy moly! Yeah, I mean derivatives. What are they up to now? Like 1.5 quadrillion?
My estimate has been about 1.5 quadrillion. I haven't been able, to find time to revise that. It might be 2 quadrillion. But then remember, that's a snapshot. What's in existence at any given time? If we want to look at turnover, there are indications that the yearly buying and selling of derivatives, right, in the course of a year, that gets up to 5, 6, 7 trillion. So all we want is 1%, right? Just 1% of that.
I could go for that.
How can anybody be against it? How can anybody say no? You can tax anything, right? As
that's right.
Shepard was saying, you can tax the bread of the poor, but no, you can't tax the derivatives of the predatory zombie bankers.
Well, I for one think that we definitely need reform in this country. That we definitely need to look at where we want to go as a people. And let me tell you this too. I can't see any harm in investing in infrastructure. I just can't. I think especially as tired and degraded as ours is, we really need to put a focus and an emphasis on that if we're going to advance.
Absolutely.
And the other thing too is we definitely do you think we're too far gone to change the posture back to a production-based economy?
No, I don't think that for a minute. I'm optimistic. I just want to see people fight. I think the American people are not to be counted out. I think that would be wrong. And if once you do that, then you get into horrible consequences also for yourself. No, the American people are still to be heard from. Right? Have not thoroughly awakened. And you look, what do they got to choose from, right? You can choose between Rand Paul, Noam Chomsky, the anarchists of Occupy Wall Street, Obama. No. They've got to be given. We got to do everything to give them a real choice that they can be aware of. By the way, there's a world consensus that infrastructure gets you a recovery, and it's based on the New Deal, right? It's based on the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Rural Electrification Administration. Mm-hmm. Just one example. The building of the Tennessee Valley Authority, right? Oh, it was communism, it was socialism. Oh my God. That is what brought modern life to that whole area of the South. And one of the things it meant was that when the time came to have nuclear research, the United States had as much electricity in the Tennessee Valley alone as all of Germany. So the Tennessee Valley was beating the entire German economy in terms of electricity production, right? So these are assets that you need. One of the things that's most disturbing right now is there are movements, for example, in Europe, right? Beppe Grillo, if you followed this, right? The 5-star movement of Italy. Yeah. This is a group of lunatics, right? He is supported by the State Department, by Goldman Sachs. He is an absolute degenerate, right? And I'll go on and on about him. But the main thing is he's against all infrastructure. He says there's a plan to build a fast rail from Turin, Italy to Lyon, France. And that's part of a trans-European freight corridor. From the mouth of the Congo River all the way into the interior of Africa, and then all the way up to the junction where the Blue Nile meets the White Nile at Khartoum, which is, if you've ever been there, there's a Hilton Hotel right there where they come together. You could have that kind of a waterway. You could be on it through the Congo. You could then go up the Nile. You could turn off to the right to go to Ethiopia, or you could keep going to Cairo and Alexandria and Port Said and the Mediterranean, right? In other words, that
there's a backlog of stuff in terms of the great projects of infrastructure, and all of that can be done using this notion of 0% credit. You could do that through the Export-Import Bank. There's a good one. The Export-Import Bank is a great thing. That needs to be funded, right? And they need to get their money at 0%. Now they have to lend it out a little bit more because there is a risk. But the U.S. exports without the Export-Import Bank would absolutely collapse.
Wow.
So they're all simple things. There's nothing oppressive about that. There's no exploitation. It's just that you can't have a government that's indifferent to economic progress. You've got to promote economic progress. That's the responsibility of government. When the preamble to the Constitution says promote the general welfare, that's what it means. Promote successful economic development in which everybody participates, right? Higher wages, industrialization. Naturally, some people at the top get rich. So what? The overall standard of living is rising. Equality is not the goal. I mean, you can have 20 to 1, 30 to 1, 50 to 1. That's all right. 600 to 1 probably is not so good, right? That's what we have now, 600 or 700 to 1. This is too much. But within that framework, you can have something for everybody. In other words, I would even argue to an industrial capitalist, at least, you'd make out better under what I'm talking about than you do today. And most industrial capitalists, if you can find any, they would agree with that, right? Because they say the whole system today is skewed in favor of the banker, the speculator, the derivatives monger, and what have you.
Well, wow, Webster. I mean, this is... I personally am a fan of going after the banks. I think that it is certainly one of the major, if not the number one focus that we need to focus on, simply because they're the ones with the ear of Congress. They're the ones that line the pockets, and they're the ones that are doing the damage and the looting and the plundering. So anything that we can do to pump up and support, that movement, the United Front for Austerity, just let us know so we can plug it on the air.
It's the United Front against austerity.
Against
austerity. Yeah, right.
Yes, that's the counter organization.
No, and that's the big worldwide issue. Where do you stand, right? And you look at somebody like Rand Paul. Rand Paul says, balance the budget in 5 years. Too bad if you die. Right? What is the point of this? It's absolutely crazy. And again, right now, the focus, if you want to take a look, is this tax Wall Street party. You can go to let's see, Credico2013.org, Credico2013.org, and you can see, right, this year there's a Virginia governor's race, there's New Jersey governor, but then there's mayor of New York. That's a very big one. It's as big as either of those other two. And there, at least, we have a voice, right? He's not as well funded as de Blasio, right? The attempt right now is Soros wants to impose de Blasio. Soros is basically tired of Bloomberg owning the city, right? The Wall Street tycoon Bloomberg, the Wall Street parasite. Soros says, "What am I, chopped liver? I'm a bigger predator than you are, Bloomberg. I want control of the city." So he wants to send in this de Blasio. But no, Credico and the Wall Street sales tax, that's what deserves your attention. And it's amazing, right? A movement coming up from the sidewalks and the asphalt of New York that says tax Wall Street, because otherwise you can't live, right? Otherwise, if you don't tax Wall Street, the city is, it's starving right in the midst of this huge river of money.
Well, I'll tell you this. The other nice thing is that he's for... He's against stop and...
Look, all of these other candidates, this is an amazing thing. They do the weasel words. They do the double talk, right? Like de Blasio says, oh, we want the era of stop and frisk to be over. What does that mean? How about that stop and frisk should be over?
Yeah, that's probably good.
Right? And stop it. And the other one's this Quinn. Quinn is the head of the city council. She's a clone of Bloomberg. See? So you're either going to get a clone of Bloomberg in the form of Quinn or a clone of Soros in the form of de Blasio. And Quinn says, well, we want to reform it. We want to remove the bad aspects, but mend it, don't end it. That's Quinn, and all of them, they all pretend they were against it, and they all pretend that they want it over. But then you read really carefully, and that's not what they're saying at all. They all want to keep it, except they want to make it less racist and less oppressive, and so forth. Credico's the only one who says end it, and I have to say, he speaks as somebody who's been arrested a few times. Right? He was arrested at Occupy.
Oh wow!
He was arrested at Occupy. He was arrested once with Cornel West doing an racism protest. And this is what I think is extraordinary. Credico goes from Occupy Wall Street, where I think he had ideas about demands, but there were no demands, right? And they were very militant. No demands, no demands, no demands. It's crazy. To now, Credico has 24 promises to the people, and any of them that cost money are paid for by the Wall Street sales tax. 24 promises.
Can't beat that. Somebody that has a plan and actually will pay for it.
24th promise is we can pay for all of the above with a 0.5% sales tax on Wall Street stock transactions, which could raise $60 billion per year. That's just stock. I would say make it derivatives too. And that would double the income of New York City. Double the income. So you'd have money to pay for the things that Bloomberg has destroyed. Anyway, that's I call that progress. So if that's possible, then we need to be optimistic.
No, absolutely. And I don't want to keep you, Webster. If you want to hang out with us, that's great.
I'm afraid I have to drift off in a few minutes.
I figured you had to drift off. Yeah.
What others have to say? I don't know.
Boys, what are you guys' thoughts on all this? Well,
guys, could I just point out there's a study which everybody should look at. It's from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and they do a yearly or periodically they do a report card on U.S. infrastructure, and their rating for U.S. infrastructure last time around, a couple of months ago, a D+. Now, before that, it had been D, but there was some money in the Obama stimulus that did get into infrastructure. There was $80 billion for a highway bill. It was totally inadequate, but some money was there, and that had some effect. So we went from a D to a D+. But the estimate from the American Society of Civil Engineers is the deficit is $3.6 trillion to get to a C. So to get from D+ to C is a long reach. You need almost $4 trillion to do that. So that would be the first demand I would make to the Federal Reserve. You cough up $4 trillion in 0% 100-year credit.
Yeah.
And the states will borrow it, and the counties and the cities and the Port Authority and all this other stuff. They can borrow that, or the Transcontinental Maglev Authority will borrow it, and we'll get building, and that will give you $150,000 to $200,000 is a job, right? So do the division, and you get some pretty good job numbers.
Pretty good growth. Yeah, absolutely. Webster, we got to wrap it up because Susan Lindauer is going to be joining. But hey, I appreciate you coming out again and supporting us. And
everybody should take note of the bankruptcy of the existing models of this pseudo-populist Ron Paul, Patriot Radio, all that stuff. Right? That's essentially it's returning to the Republican Party. I'm sorry. It's it's Breitbart, it's Drudge, it's becoming sort of like a radical version of Fox News. The similarities are getting greater and greater, and that's no future for anybody. In other words, nobody wants to hear that kind of nonsense. Nobody wants to hear a broadcast which is a branch of one of these two political parties that everybody hates. And that's where a lot of that stuff is going, right? Libertarians are now part of the Republican Party, right? They're ensconced with Little Rand and the rest of his crew there, right, who want to shut down the government. So that's where Unbound comes in, right? Unbound is my hope to create a new model.
CIA, Arab Legion, or whatever you want to call it. He was arrested. So you could see that what they were trying to do was to bring the Syrian civil war to Egypt, or the Libyan civil war to Egypt. That model, that is what they absolutely wanted to do. They wanted to have a coup where Morsi would be the coup from inside the presidential palace. They could start this Islamic Emirate of the Sinai Peninsula. That would allow the U.S. and NATO to come in and seize the Suez Canal, and the country would begin to break up. Because remember what their model is. They want to have the caliphate. So what's the caliphate? The caliphate is one supreme boss who sits above it, and then you have these emirs, right? So everybody can be their own emir, right? Egypt could fall into 20 or 50 emirates, right? And the Sinai could be one of them, right? There are emirates functioning in northern Syria right now, several, more than one. So you get the idea. This is what was planned. And it looks to me like General Sisi was able to beat them to the punch. In other words, he preempted them. He saw what was coming. He realized that most generals would be assassinated under that scenario, right? If Morsi had remained in power, there was going to be a civil war. Lots of generals would have just been taken out and shot to have. And it's an effort, obviously, to maintain an independent position. But I would urge people to do it. And there's a cultural aspect, right? Because the world of this Patriot radio was some kind of I don't know what, country and Western. And this is fine as far as it goes, but that can't be the only thing. There's got to be something urban. There's got to be something labor-oriented, right? There's got to be something which is not simply, I don't know what, deep in the heart of Texas, right? This is not the whole story. That will never do, right? There's an urban industrial Northeast or California or Midwest. All of that has gotten really, very little attention, and I think it would need more. Case in point is this stuff in Egypt, which maybe we can talk about if people want.
Yeah.
I think that this is a very good thing that we have General Sisi and the Egyptian army, because what was going to happen there, and you can see it now more clearly in retrospect, is that the Muslim Brotherhood with Morsi, but also with Al-Qaeda, right? Today, the news from today is that Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda, had his brother arrested in Egypt by the police and the army, right? So the brother of the world's top Al-Qaeda terrorist, that was the head of the top Ron Paul, then Rand Paul endorsing Romney openly, and now Rand Paul allied with Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz's wife, of course, is from Goldman Sachs. Everybody should know that, to put him in perspective, right? And that Mike Lee, that entire clique. What you're left with is that entire thing is being sucked back into the extreme right wing of the Republican Party, and all the positive social role or political role that it could have played, all of that is gone. And what you see is that the people who were the great lights of Patriot media, libertarian media, they're really competing with Breitbart. They're trying to be the new Breitbart. They're trying to get on Matt Drudge. They want Matt Drudge to like them. They want Drudge to prefer them to Breitbart. They're trying to get on Fox News every now and then. So this has become a real serious problem, because all of those people are getting convoyed back into the Republican Party. That is why I think something like Unbound Media is important as a laboratory to find a way to maintain an attitude of very radical criticism towards both parties, both Democrats, Wall Street Democrats, and reactionary or fascist Republicans, because that is what you now see. And I wanted to remind people, I have a lot of people writing me that, the U.S. wanted the coup, the U.S. owns the Egyptian army. 1.5 billion is not enough to buy the Egyptian army. Saudi Arabia is already paying 10 to 12 million in protection money. And just because they're so scared, they paid that money. So Egypt doesn't need that money. But here we have the Washington Post of Thursday. The U.S. criticism of Egypt reflects fears of military rule, fears of Nasserism. Because what we have now is a new Nasserism, and that, of course, in the Middle East historically, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, Nasserism was the thing that the imperialists hated and feared most, and they always backed the Muslim Brotherhood against the Nasserists, right? They just always did, from the 1920s to the 50s to today. That has never changed. So I would say rather than say there's the danger of a civil war, I would say that the Egyptian army has preempted a civil war. In other words, they struck first before the Civil War guys were ready to go into action. And what you see now is a broken-backed version of what the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to do, and they're losing, right? And I don't think this goes on for too much longer because they're just they're getting mopped up, right? They're getting quelled. So that's the end of that.
How do you?
Oh, hey, Webster Tarpley's joining us there, everybody.
Hey, hello.
Hey, Webster, can you hear us?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, fantastic! It's great to have you back on. Boy,
Thank you.
Twice in a day. It's a real treat.
How's it going, Webster?
Not too bad.
We got Shepard and Bellis here, Kenneth Webb, and Joe Bannister.
Hi, Webster.
Just kind of talking about the independent media a bit and the importance of having that counterbalance to the mainstream media, Webster.
Well, let me say maybe a couple of things. I think that what we've seen over the past year, since the Bilderberger group of last year, is the complete failure and breakdown of what used to be called patriot media or libertarian media, the area that generally supported Ron Paul and has now switched to Rand Paul. And this was always deeply problematic, but you could say that as long as these people were fighting something like the 9/11 big lie, right, the official story on 9/11, they were having a positive social function. But now they've tied themselves to a faction of the Republican Party, that is to say, Ron Paul. And as that has degenerated, and as that has become more and more obviously a power play, right? Ron Paul supporting Romney,